As we lead into our feature program here, I will begin to, we'll wrap that up, and I'll turn it over to Eric Tannenblatt. Eric, I don't know if you'll be able to use some of that information or not, but Eric, welcome to our stage. For those of you who don't know Eric, of course, just one of our leading club members. He's Global Chair of Public Policy and Regulation at Denton's. He's widely regarded as one of the preeminent public policy thought leaders. And I know you've served for 3 U.S. presidents in their administration, as well as you've advised Senator Coverdell and Governor Perdue. Long history, and thank you for bringing us this great program today.
Thank you, Cannon. It's a real pleasure to join you and other fellow Rotarians as we look ahead to the November election. But before I introduce our other panelists, though, I do want to express my gratitude, along with the gratitude of Michelle Nunn, Virginia Hepner, and Martha Brooks, and all those who have signed up to be part of the Georgia Support the Vote initiative that you referenced earlier. And again, I just encourage everyone, as you said, to sign up this week as we launch this really important Rotary initiative.
Well, thank you for leading this initiative. It's huge, and it's another chance for our club to lean in and make a difference. So thank you. Well,
it's been an honor to do so. So if it's all right with you, I'd like to move right into the program. So speaking of elections, it's hard to believe that we're only 44 days away from Election Day. And I am pleased to be joined today by 4 of my colleagues at Denton's, all of whom have had distinguished careers in government and have been intimately involved in state and federal politics, so that they can share their perspectives on the current political landscape as we look ahead to November. So at this time, it's my pleasure and honor to introduce Governor Howard Dean. Governor Dean served as governor of Vermont from 1991 to 2003. He ran for the Democratic nomination for president in 2004 and served as chairman of the Democratic National Committee from 2005 to 2009. Ron Kaufman served as the White House political director for President George H.W. Bush and as a senior advisor to Mitt Romney's 2008 and 2012 campaigns. He's currently the treasurer of the Republican National Committee and is serving his 9th 4-year term as the Republican National Committee man from the state of Massachusetts. Mayor Michael Nutter, who served as the mayor of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania from 2007 to 2015. He was previously a member of the Philadelphia City Council. He's also the former president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors and is currently an at-large member of the Democratic National Committee. And lastly, Representative Polly Lawrence. Polly is a former member of the Colorado General Assembly, where she served as House Republican Whip and Assistant Minority Leader. So welcome, panelists, colleagues. It's hard to believe that it's only been a month since both national parties concluded their conventions and officially nominated their candidates for president and vice president of the United States. Voting has already started in North Carolina earlier this month, and others will be following shortly. In fact, absentee ballots will start to be mailed out in Georgia this week. Our country is still facing the COVID-19 pandemic with the hopes of a vaccine on the horizon. Our political leaders in Washington cannot come to terms on a budget or additional funding for COVID-related issues. Unemployment is dropping, and our economy seems to be starting to pick up. And then, of course, the country was saddened this weekend with the passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a real giant on the Supreme Court and lifelong champion for gender equity. Her passing has not only left a void on the court, but has sparked a passionate political debate regarding the filling of the vacancy. We have fires burning in California. We're still amidst hurricane season, and debate season is upon us, with the first presidential debate being next week. So bringing us back to where I opened, all this is happening while we are 44 days away from the election. So with that backdrop, I'd like to start by asking each of you to take a minute or two and share your thoughts on the current political landscape and what you see in the next 44 days. And we'll start with you, Governor Dean.
Yeah, I would say this country is at the most polarized it's been since the Civil War, and we're in very, very deep trouble. And I think polarization has just been exacerbated by the passing of Justice Ginsburg because of the desire of the Republicans to fill that in a way that they were unwilling to fill a similar seat that was vacated 8 months before the election when President Obama was in office. So no matter what happens, this is going to be an unbelievably bitter end to this election. If the Democrats win, we're going to clearly have to restructure a lot of things. There's been an enormous amount of corruption. A lot of people don't believe in government anymore on both sides of the aisle, I think. And we're going to have to figure out a way to incorporate as many of the Trump supporters as we can into the fabric of this country again. I think if the Republicans win, we were in terribly, terribly deep trouble. I think you'll see secessionist movements in some of the states. I think you'll see a very obstructionist House. My guess is that the Democrats will win the Senate if Joe Biden wins, and we probably won't win the Senate if Trump wins. So it's a tough, grim time for America.
Ron, your thoughts?
Well, thank you, Eric, and thank you all in Atlanta for having us here. Before I get into the election, I'd like to share some other grim thoughts, and that was last night's football games. I'm sorry what happened to your Falcons, and I'm equally sorry what happened to my Patriots. So we both could have had a better day today than ended up. I have a different outlook than my friend, the governor of Vermont. Since you started with history, a little history, 75%, since 1860, 75% of incumbents won the election. However, only 2 sitting or former vice presidents went on to be president of the United States. In the last 20 elections, the 10 before Vietnam, 10 of the 10, 9 incumbents won re-election. Since that point in time, 9 of 10 lost. I'm not incumbents, but people from Washington, people with the most Washington experience. So before Vietnam, 9 out of 10 won. Since Vietnam, 9 out of 10 actually lost. And for the Democrats, kind of interesting, since 76, all the disruptive candidates that they nominate win. And all the establishment Democrats since then have lost. What does that all mean? Beats me. I don't think anyone knows. This is a year like no other year in history. One thing that I think, though, is kind of important, at least from our perspective on the Republican side, is that 59% of the folks voting for Donald Trump, who say they're voting for Donald Trump, in fact, enthusiastically voting for Donald Trump. 55%, however, of the folks voting for Joe Biden, according to all the polls, 55% are voting against Donald Trump. And I think that's a weakness that I think that the Democrats have had to deal with. If you remember, Vice President Biden came in 4th or 5th in New Hampshire, had no organization, etc., and was about to lose to Howard Dean's friend, Senator Bernie Sanders, in South Carolina, and to Congressman Jim Clyburn gave a brilliant speech, turned the election around, in fact, knocked off Sanders, and Vice President Biden became the nominee. So I think there's a lack of enthusiasm for Joe Biden, who's a fine person, and a lot of enthusiasm among Trump voters for Trump. And there, up until last night, or night before, there were 3 issues that really mattered. The top 3 issues. You mentioned them earlier, I think. The economy, COVID, and the public safety versus racial sensitivity. And those are 3 issues really, in fact, pushing voters one way or the other. And to add to that now, I think, the fact that Justice Ginsburg died over the weekend, and I echo the thoughts of everyone else. She was, no matter what you think about politics and the issues, she was a great, large human factor in this country, and a real leader to help thousands and tens of thousands of women be better off in life today. So despite that, I think there's going to be a really significant battle for that seat, and that will move voters. Right now, I think it's kind of one debate, two debates, three debates, and one vaccine away from Donald Trump probably winning re-election.
Mayor Nutter, your thoughts?
Well, a couple of things. I think that I appreciate Ron's sense of perspective, I guess. The fact that any president would have the development of a vaccine now as a part of their electoral game plan, I think is a true indicator of the weakness of that individual, while at the same time failing to acknowledge the now 200,000 Americans who have died, many unnecessarily, because of the failures of this incumbent president. Secondly, the tragedy of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I think, further crystallizes for many, many people, some who may not have necessarily been thinking about voting, the significance of the power of the presidency and what additional issues are on the ballot. Healthcare and pre-existing conditions and access to healthcare are now fully on the ballot. Women's reproductive rights and the right to their own body to make decisions are now on the ballot, and certainly civil rights fully and clearly on the ballot. When the laws have been passed and sometimes have worked and sometimes have not, Black people and people of color have many of the rights that we have because of the courts, and ultimately in a nation of laws, the final rulings of the United States Supreme Court. And so the issues in this election become that much more crystal clear. Having run for office and, you know, I've won and I've lost, I know which one I like better. You know, people vote how they vote because of how they vote. And you don't have often the luxury of making the distinction between, are you really voting for me or are you voting, you know, against my opponent? You know, in this business, a vote is a vote, and you're grateful for it, whichever way it comes to you. And so I think that Democrats, Republicans, and independents are that much more energized about Joe Biden. They see there's no mystery. There's no new information about Donald Trump. And I guess one last thing I would say is it just at a personal level, it just seems to me an affront to any human nature and capacity that within an hour of the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that the political machine jumped into operation and suddenly felt compelled to announce that a replacement would soon be being made. I'm not even sure if the justice was out of her home yet. And so it just seems to me a level of disrespect to her. All of those announcements, all the politics have their time and can wait until you give full dignity and respect to someone who has served this country so well and for so long.
Polly.
Well, I think there's a lot of things that I could touch on there. I would echo back to the 2016 election when you had people voting for Donald Trump and against Hillary Clinton. I don't think that's anything unusual in an election year. You're going to find people who like their candidate and really dislike the other one. I think the Biden campaign has been conspicuously silent in a lot of instances, and they have avoided the public safety issue, which is certainly a big issue across the country. When you look at the vandalism and the riots that really what started as a movement in reaction to the murder of George Floyd transformed into something completely different. And I think it has been co-opted by people who don't have the same philosophy and the same objective goals that the original protesters had. And I think that's having an influence across the country. When it comes to the unfortunate death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I think we all grieve for her family. That is a terrible loss. And she was a larger than life figure, whether you liked her decisions or not. She was a strong advocate for women, for the rights of everyone across this country. And her voice will be missed on the Supreme Court. That said, I think the conversation started on both sides of the aisle almost immediately as to would she be replaced, or would we wait until after the election and after the inauguration? So I think the polarization is much worse than I've ever seen. I hope that Governor Dean is not right, that there are secessionist ideas. But I will tell you, in Colorado, when John Hickenlooper signed some bills that weren't liked by Northern Colorado, they tried to secede from Colorado. So there are folks around the country who have those thoughts. I hope it doesn't come to that. I would say that with the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it has certainly changed the complexion of some of these hotly contested Senate races around the country. And one of the top races is right here in Colorado with Senator Cory Gardner going up against former Governor John Hickenlooper. I think it's going to be a big issue going forward. And I would just remind everyone that that was a big issue why Trump was elected, because he put out his list of nominees, and there were people across the country who wanted a more conservative Supreme Court. And that's a big reason why he won in 2016. And that's a big reason why the Senate majority for Republicans was expanded in 2018. So there are so many different factors playing into this, and it could be read 1,000 different ways. It's just going to depend on where the voters are when they finally decide to cast their ballots.
I'm gonna jump around a little bit now because I have a number of questions that I want to ask, and I'm going to start, Mayor Nutter. Can you comment on the impact that Senator Harris is going to have on the Biden ticket? I mean, not only is she would be the first African American woman, but she sits on the Senate Judiciary Committee. And so if the Senate does move forward with the filling the vacancy of Justice Ginsburg, Senator Harris can play a role in that as well.
Yeah, no, Senator Harris has played a significant role in a couple of the recent confirmations. But Eric, I want to take 30 seconds. I love Holly, but Holly, the current narrative, the current fiction about what's going on in cities. First of all, none of them are on fire. And virtually nothing is going on. And to just say that there's violence in cities ignores why it happened in the first place. Again, I am against it. I am nonviolent. I do not believe in destruction. But please do not overlook why people are in the streets in the middle of a pandemic. It's because police officers are killing Black people, and they are tired of it. And so that is the real issue. And so if we're going to talk about demonstrations, protests, let's also recognize at least why people are protesting in the first place. With regard to Senator Harris, obviously she brought a tremendous dynamic to the ticket in the first place. The debate between Senator Harris and Vice President Pence, I think is going to be one for the ages. So on judiciary, should Donald Trump and team try to force through in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of a presidential election, a sudden Supreme Court nominee, I think the senator will play a significant role in that regard. So it's a tremendous choice by Joe Biden. Fundraising has kicked into high gear as a result of her being on the ticket. She's just been an absolute winner for Democrats in this regard.
Ron, let me ask you about the battleground states. It was, looking at Real Clear Politics, which aggregates all of the polls. If you look at the battleground states, it has Vice President Biden up 3.8%. More specifically, it has him up 1.6 in Florida, 4 points in Pennsylvania, 4.8 in Michigan, 6.7 in Wisconsin, 0.9 in North Carolina, 0.5 in Arizona. Should there be concern on the part of the Trump campaign that in these battleground states, it's clear that Vice President Biden is ahead?
Well, I think there's reasons for both parties to be concerned about their candidate right now, Eric. I think it's very unclear. I can't remember ever being as unclear what's going to happen today, 44 days out, than it is now. Can I just jump back one second out to Mayor Nutter's? I agree with 100%. There's no place in America for unjust justice. And clearly there's a systemic problem among a certain small minority of police departments across the country, and they should be dealt with and dealt with severely. But as Jim Clyburn said during a lot of the unrest, don't let the radicals steal what we've accomplished. $2.5 billion of looting, destruction, and claims against insurance policies across America during this unrest. Clearly, that frightens a lot of people. And yes, we must do a better job with systemic racism. It's there, and you have to admit that it is there to a point. But not to a point where you upset the other 90%, 95%, 98% of those officers trying to do a really good job for us and our kids. Eric, so going back to your question, which I've almost forgotten at this point in time.
Battleground states.
Yeah. If you look at the states individually, the president is much better off today than he was before the convention. So the two things that can really influence what happens that you have some control over going into the final couple of weeks of the election. One is the conventions, and two are the debates. Well, the conventions are over, and candidly, neither convention moved the needle a whole bunch. But clearly, in all the polls, we're better off after the convention than before. So I think the debates are going to have a huge impact on all this. People are voting against Trump without really thinking that come in the end, you have to make a binary choice. It's either for the president or against or for Biden, not just against the president one way or the other. And I think this debate is going to be both these debates will be very important. And clearly, the Democratic Party has gone far to the left, and far to the left where this country's ever gone before. And I don't believe that most Americans want to go that far to the left with our country. We are the greatest country in the world with all our problems, with all our foibles. We are the greatest country in the history of the earth. I think we want to remain that way. And by going too far to the left, we'll be France, not USA.
Governor Dean, let's sort of continue on the battleground states, but talk about with regards to the competitive Senate races and how. Sure. What's your thoughts on the competitive Senate races and how that's going to impact the presidential or vice versa?
First, I do have to have a few chuckles at Ron's expense. In fact, the Democratic Party is actually moving to the center. The problem is the Republican Party has gone so far right, it's unrecognizable with the embrace of neo-Nazis. So, and we won 40 seats last in 2018. 5 were Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and people like that who get all the press because they're extremely articulate and they say outrageous things sometimes. The other 35 were from places like Georgia, Western Pennsylvania, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Orange County, California. You cannot win running left-wing candidates in those places, and we're not. Having said that, I expect we're going to win in Georgia, possibly 2 seats in Georgia. I expect we're going to win in Iowa. I expect we have a decent shot in Kansas. This leaves aside the supposed swing states that everybody's been focusing on for 2 years, which is North Carolina, where I think we're going to win, Arizona, where I think we're going to win, Maine, where I think we're going to win. So I'm pretty optimistic. A lot of it has to do with what's going on the top of the ticket. Ron's right about one thing. This is not Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. This is America versus corruption. We are seeing a corruption in this country, the like of what we've never seen. And Republicans know that too. They may vote for Trump because they're angry or because Trump is a racist and they don't mind. A fair number of people don't mind voting for racists these days. But I think the decency of the American people is above that. And there are going to be people who vote in this election against Trump. That is a very, very powerful force. Newt Gingrich managed to do that. Newt Gingrich revolutionized, not for the better, American politics by bringing fury and anger into the election. And that's what his MO was in 1994, and it's been with us ever since. So I'm optimistic. I think most people actually support the Black Lives Matter movement by about 55%. 62% of Americans, including half of the Republicans, believe that it would be wrong to appoint a justice before the election, and that the new president or the existing president should be doing that after the election. So I would say that we're in pretty good shape. This is a battle to see if America works or not. We've had the most corrupt president in the history of the United States of America, and that's saying something. And I think people are sick of it. And I think we are going to vote out of anger, but we're also going to vote out of hope.
So, Polly, you mentioned the Cory Gardner Senate race. Care to talk about any of the other Senate races around the country and how you see those playing out?
Well, I think the Supreme Court justice and having that open seat is going to have an effect in every race. Having Susan Collins come out right away to say that that seat shouldn't be filled until after the inauguration was a strong statement on her part. And I think it really demonstrates the character and the policy that she has had throughout her career. So when I hear people criticize her about being, in Donald Trump's pocket, I would say as a Republican and watching Susan Collins work in the past, that's just absolutely not true. I think these races are tightening. What we're seeing on the presidential platform and on the Senate platforms, all of these races are, well, most of them are getting tighter. I will say Colorado, I believe, is within the margin of error. If you look at Cory Gardner's record, even though he's being painted as a Donald Trump acolyte, he has opposed the president on a lot of different things and has come out and criticized him throughout his career. John Hickenlooper is following the Joe Biden campaign technique where he's not showing up anywhere. He's not really speaking to the public, and he is just having a pretty quiet campaign. And when you look at what's going on across the country, there is a difference in how candidates are campaigning. Republicans are reaching out directly to voters, and Democrats seem to be using social media and phone calls with no personal contact so that their messages can be much more scripted and much less personalized to the voter that they're contacting. So to the extent that people are really focusing on the election, and this is an incredibly important election across the country, I truly believe it is. There are still a lot of people who are not like the four of us who focus on politics every day. This is not their priority on a daily basis. They're worried about, their jobs, their kids, are schools going to be open? I think that's going to be a big issue, especially for a lot of parents who are trying to work from home and teach their kids. That's a lot to put on parents who haven't had to do that before. We normally send our kids to school and we trust our schools to educate them. And now all of a sudden, it's going on through webinars, much like this, and parents are kind of seeing what the curriculum is like, how their kids are being taught. I think it might be raising some questions, but it's putting an additional strain on those households, and especially households that don't have access to broadband and good internet connections, which I think will be a big topic, and it should be a big topic for Congress in the next session to make sure that all of America is connected if we're going to continue having the opportunity to work remotely and kids have the opportunity to learn remotely.
Well, you mentioned that we spend a lot of time focusing on politics because we're involved in it. Although I will say, as a Georgian, I don't think there's anyone that's watching today. You can't turn on your TV set and not be confronted with ads from our two Senate races that are going on right now. Ron, I know you follow the Georgia Senate races, and in fact, if I remember correctly, you took David Perdue to meet your former boss, President George H.W. Bush, in Kennebunkport, Maine, when he was running for the Senate in his first race. But what's your sense from your vantage point of what's happening in Georgia with our two Senate races?
Well, I think you can make the case pretty easily, Eric, that the Senate may not be decided until the runoff for your special election. With 4 candidates in the race, it's pretty hard for either one of the two frontrunners to get to 50%. So my guess is we're talking about a potential of January before we know what's going to happen in the Senate for control. But it's a crazy election cycle. I've been in Maine, as you mentioned earlier, and you turn on the TV and you realize that both sides are going to spend $50 million on TV ad in Maine. Eric, I can remember when you could buy Maine $50 million, let alone a Senate race. So it's a problem. The good news for Republicans is we stole from Barack Obama his secret sauce, which is organization. And the RNC over the last 4 years has spent $300 to $400 million on data and technology, investing it early. And we've had another $200 or $300 million spent on field staff for 4 years. It's one of the reasons that Barack Obama won in 2008. And it's one of the reasons I believe the advantage we have over the Democrats this time, and all the swing states in particular, is the fact that we've invested all this money early, and the DNC had no money until recently. Vice President Biden had no money until recently. So I feel pretty comfortable that if organization matters, and Governor Dean was actually the godfather of this movement, if organization and data really matters in this day and age, I honestly believe we have a great advantage that will show up in early voting and on election day.
Mayor Nutter, Governor Dean, do either of you have any observations from what you see about the Georgia Senate races?
I think they're both going to be unbelievably close. I think I would give. That's a very hard. I don't think I could really predict. I think the Perdue Ossoff race will be very, very close, and I would give Ossoff a very tiny edge, only because I think there are going to be a lot of Georgians that are out there saying no to Trump, and because I do think the African American community, particularly in Atlanta, has been galvanized by the police shooting there. In the runoff, I agree with Ron. It's almost impossible to predict what's going to happen in a 13-person race. I expect Reverend Warnock will make the runoff with one of the Republicans. Normally, I would just say yes. I think Warnock will win. I think that Kelly Loeffler's got so much money that that's going to be a tough race for us. I do think we can win. But again, that's a much harder race because it goes from November all the way through January. I have to say that if a Republican is confirmed to Justice Ginsburg's seat, that will energize the Democratic side after the election and carry us through, I think, probably to win that Senate seat.
Mayor Nutter, did you have?
Governor Dean has covered all that territory very well. I would just add that I am increasingly impressed by the continued upward movement by Reverend Warnock, and I think folks might want to pay a little more attention to that race.
So I mentioned earlier that we're a week away from the start of debate season. And I'd like to, Ron, you advised presidents in the past, and Governor Dean, you ran for national office. How impactful can these debates be, and what do you anticipate is going to happen in these 3 debates or 4 debates?
I think.
I'll start with you, Ron.
Sure. In the end of the day, history says that debates don't really matter since 1960. They haven't really had an impact although I kind of disagree. I think that Ronald Reagan's performance overall helped him win his election. But it can matter. If you go back to 12 with President Obama and Mitt Romney, the only time Mitt Romney was ahead in the race was after the first debate when he did a job against Barack Obama. If he had followed up with a second good debate, I think that would have made a difference. I do think that this debate is going to be very, very important for the reasons that we all kind of agree on. There's a very much more of an anti-Trump feeling out there among a lot of voters who are tending to lean toward Biden now. I think those two debates or three debates between Vice President Biden and Donald Trump really will be a decisive factor in who the next president of the United States is going to be.
Governor Dean?
Well, again, as Ron said, that really hasn't happened since 1960, although debates have had their moments. It's always possible. You never know what's going to happen. I suspect that this vote is so baked in right now that the debates won't have much of an effect. There are almost as close to zero as you can get swing voters in this country right now. There are a number of Republicans who are disenchanted with Trump, and some of whom will vote for the Democrats, and some will go back to Trump. Usually you're talking about a 10 or 12% swing vote. Today, I think you're talking about a 3 or 4% swing vote. There's two interesting things in the polls you have to think about. One is a sort of the shy Trump voter. That is somebody who doesn't want to admit to the pollster they're going to vote for Trump. I don't believe that a person exists anymore. The Trump people are really out there. Part of voting for Trump is to be in your face and own the liberals, as they like to say. So I don't think there's such a thing as a shy Trump voter. The other are people who really are undecided. And I frankly think, corruption is the deciding issue. As I said before, nobody can deny this is the most corrupt president in the history of the United States of America, just on the merits, on the facts. And people don't like that. They really don't. And they don't like all the stuff that he said, the bad language he used the other day. It was funny, sort of, but people just don't think that's presidential. And I think that is going to help with a minimal number of swing voters there are. I think that's going to probably work against Trump. And the last thing I'll say is, if the national polls are correct, we could afford to lose all the swing voters and we would still win because Biden's over 50. And that hasn't happened for a very long time, that the winner's been over 50.
So, Polly and Mayor Nutter, I'd like you to comment on early voting. What's the impact do you think early voting is going to have on this election? I mean, right now, voters in North Carolina are voting. There are going to be people in Georgia this week that could send their ballot. What's your thought on early voting and the impact it's going to have on this election? Polly?
I think having people vote early before the debates is probably cutting off some information that they might want at the end of the day. I'm kind of surprised that there is early voting this early. I mean, in Colorado, our ballots drop on October 9th, and we should see them in our mailboxes, 4 to 5 days after that. But that gives us time to see the first debate and see a little bit more about what's going on with the filling of the Supreme Court seat. I think for those folks who have already made up their mind, it doesn't matter. They're going to vote for the person that they've already decided on. But for a lot of those people who are still waiting on a couple of key issues, I think they're going to hang on to their ballot. So you're going to see the hardcore right and left turn in their ballots. But I still think, and I disagree with Governor Dean, I respect your opinion. I still think there are a lot of people who are making that decision, especially on the Senate races, especially on contested Senate races. I personally think a split government works better than a government that is controlled by one party in every chamber. It kind of eliminates the crazy stuff from the right and the left, and it brings people together to try to find common goals and consensus on issues that affect the entire country. And I think really a lot of people are looking for that. They're looking for something that can bring this country back together. Right now, neither side is talking to the other side. And I do believe there are still a lot of quiet Republicans out there who are not going to wear their MAGA hat or fly their Trump flag on the back of their car as they're driving through town, because there are a lot of liberals who don't like that, and they'll get in your face. So I'm not saying it's just one side or the other. I think it's both sides, quite honestly.
Mayor Nutter?
Impact of early voting. I mean, I think, certainly there will be a whole lot more of it, given the pandemic, people choosing to, vote early or vote by mail rather than, obviously risk the health outcome. At the same time, as you kind of fast forward, having those early votes in and ultimately counted deals with the other issue that many of us are concerned about, which is election night. The number of votes on the machine, the number of votes mail-in ballot, various states, some count early. Obviously, they don't release the results, but they count early and give a more accurate count on election night. Given all of the consternation and some of the nonsense that has gone on, having those votes in as early as possible, counted as early as possible, and released to the public as early as possible might help to, 2%, try to restore some level of faith that the public has a right to have in our electoral process and in people who are running for office. It is a broken kind of environment. We do need a sense of unity. I'm not sure if the divided government model, which we've had here recently, is the pathway forward. I think if Democrats were successful in winning the White House, winning the Senate, holding on to the House, there is a need and a call for unity. And that does not mean that, you win and you just kind of vanquish your opposition. You have a responsibility to try to bring people together and listen to what other folks have to say and try to find some common ground. And I'd like to think that a large majority a large segment, at least, of the American public wants a unified America and not a divided America. Excuse me.
Well, I want to thank all four of you. I know that Cannon is going to come back and join us, and I think he probably has a question or two that he wants to ask. But I just really want to thank you all for sharing your thoughts with us. And Cannon, I'll turn it over to you for whatever questions you have.
Well, thank you, Eric. And, I want to thank you for moderating an incredible conversation, and to our four guests for just great insights. Your leadership through the years, as well as just being with us today, is just such valuable insights and time with us. So thank you. We did have a couple questions from the audience, and I'll wrap it up into one there, and then I'll close with one other question too, kind of bigger picture. Several came in, questions about, around the potential appointment of justice, the Supreme Court. Does choosing a justice influence the purple states in the Senate between Republicans and Democrats? That was one question. Another one, if let's say the justice is appointed before the election, does that actually help Biden improve turnout because maybe Trump supporters aren't as enthused anymore? So just some quick thoughts there.
Ron, why don't you start?
Sure, I'll be glad to. I think the exit polls in 2016 said that 59% of Republican voters felt that the appointment to the court was a very important thing. 41% of Democrats felt the same thing. Historically, that's about where it's been. So I think this election is going to be really important to both sides on turnout, Cannon. I think that, however, I don't think there'll be a appointment to the court before the election. I think that's been 43 days would be an incredibly small amount of time to get this done. So I don't think there'll be any vote on the Supreme Court before the election. Perhaps in the lame duck session, there may be, but not before. And I think that in the end, Susan Collins is not going to be affected by it in Maine because of she's already made a statement, I think. And so I don't think it's going to make a huge impact on any one of the states in particular.
I'd pretty much straight up disagree with all of that. I think in the case of Susan Collins, she's already toast because of this. Because what this does is, no matter what she says, everybody is going to now remember that she voted for Brett Kavanaugh, and that is just, that's just going to sink her. So I think that's disposes that. She doesn't matter what she says, unless she says, I'm not voting for whoever Trump nominates if he doesn't win, which I think is incredibly unlikely. Very artful of her to say, I'm not voting for somebody before the election, because as Ron pointed out, it's unlikely something's going to happen before the election. I think this is an enormous boost to turnout, as Ron over-exaggeratedly, but did say that with some truth to it, that Biden was not the first choice of a lot of Democratic voters in the 13-way, well, it was originally a 17-way primary. What this does is coalesce around Biden. When you see AOC yesterday making an impassioned plea for everybody to vote for Biden, I couldn't believe it. And what this does is impassion Democratic voters to go out and vote regardless of who the candidate is. And I think you're going to see an increased turnout. And I think the problem is going to be not so much confirming the justice. That would certainly increase the turnout before the election. Just naming the justice, because the records of the justice, these are not Republican, traditional Republican, moderate to conservative people. These are far right wingers who don't believe in any of the things the Democratic Party believes in. So I think it's going to be a tremendous impetus to get people out to vote who might not have been so enthusiastic about it before on our side.
Well, thank you both for the two sides of the coin on that. Thank you. And then last question, a little bit bigger picture. So Governor Dean, Representative Lawrence, you both talked about how your view, this is the most polarized environment ever, maybe since the Civil War. That's a big statement. Mayor Nutter, you talked about this being a broken environment. In your view, what is the state of our democracy? I mean, is it healthy? Can it do what we need it to do even in this tough environment, or does something really have to change?
Something really has to change. Look, 63% of Americans under the age of 35 believe the Supreme Court is a partisan organization, and they take into account politics more than the law. That is a disaster. If a country relies on the rule of law, it is a disaster to have a significant majority of our young people, many of whom are in the workforce, this is not just teenagers, believe that the court system is rigged. Secondly, when you can influence the courts by giving as much money as you want to this is legalized bribery. I do a lot of work in Eastern Europe. I can no longer go over and lecture people about not having oligarchs running political parties because Citizens United has legalized that. What has this country come to? We have completely abandoned our moral compass. And frankly, we're in the middle of abandoning our democracy. That is what's killing this country.
Well, thank you for that. And can we get a comment from the other side? Agree, disagree?
Well, I don't think that Mayor Bloomberg is killing democracy by giving $100 million to.
I certainly do. I certainly do think so.
Listen, this is not the most fun time we've had in politics in our lifetime. It's probably the most ugliest in our lifetime. But you forget we had a sitting vice president shoot and kill a Secretary of Commerce. That's of Treasury. That's a tough election time. We'll survive this. I blame lots of things. We're all kind of guilty. I blame the social media. We're all kind of guilty of it. But we'll get through this. This is the greatest country in the history of the earth. And with all due respect to my dear friend Howard Dean, who sounds a little bit like a Debbie Downer right now, our country's great. We'll get through this no matter who wins. We'll get through this and move on. And it's cyclical. We'll get back to where we should be.
Well, we'll wrap there only because we're out of time. I would love to hear further discussion there. Just both sides being able to, educate us, but most importantly, how important it is to vote, cast our opinion, which is why our club is getting behind a fair and free election and trying to enable businesses to enable their employees to go out and have the time off to vote, and either early or on day of. So, but I just want to thank Eric. Thank you for bringing together these great 4 veterans. And I want to thank you 4 veterans as well for joining us today in what was just a very insightful and timely program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.